The HAVENBELL Trilogy, Book 1, The Child of Harmony, Chapter 2, The Adrella Sea. As soon as the skeleton hit the water, he vanished into a black cloud, leaving Trillium wrapped in the phantom's heavy clothing. She pawed wildly at the fabrics, trying to escape the grasp of the long black veil. Water entered her mouth and she began to swallow, her head going under and feeling too heavy to hold up any longer. The first gulp went down hard. It was salty and it made her stomach swirl. The more exhaustion overcame her, the more water went in. She felt light and dizzy and began to fade to unconsciousness. All of her senses had been numbed and stripped from her control. Her body seemed to float as time stood still. The physical stress of her journey and the wounds from the birds hurt no more. Energy seemed to fill her up, but her body was gone. The fuzzy veil over her eyes began to lift, and she slowly began to see the colors, black and a hint of blue. Trillium could feel her body again and realized that she was still underwater, wrapped inside of the black cloth. She unwrapped herself and blue overtook her vision. She began to see clearer, her body regaining touch and life. It no longer hurt her to breathe. The water seemed to flow through her. As her vision sharpened, she could see rocks, fish, sand, and seaweed underneath the surface of the water. The Adrella Sea, she thought with wonder. Her eyes gazed about the ocean floor. The fish made glittering patterns as they turned, dove, and swam together in unison. Kelp and seaweed swayed back and forth with the ocean's gentle current. She tried to move herself underwater using her arms and legs. She guided along easily and began to swim fast around in a circle, getting used to kicking. She could not understand why she could live underwater without drowning. She felt better than she had in days. The stranger's message about finding the shell was urgent. Trillium knew she must continue her quest and save all of Havenbell, even though she knew almost nothing about the Adrella Sea or its inhabitants. She was brave and courageous. That's what Duran had tried to teach her. She knew not of the life of the islands, but felt responsible for their safety. The Adrella Sea was elegant and beautiful. She swam happily about, feeling re-energized. The forest had a special link to her, but the sea, never looked or explored by her, felt stronger than the forest connection. She heard people whispering. No, not whispering, more like thinking. Trillium hid behind a huge rock formation and peeked out of a hole at the beings approaching. Their murmurs became words. "The king has been most sorrowful lately," the first voice said to the other. "The shell of hope is missing and Fairy Island has no protection from." The second voice faded. Trillium gasped when the sea beings swam into view. She no longer heard the words, but noticed that the two did not use their mouths to communicate. It must be some kind of telepathy, Trillium decided. Duran had explained to her that if two people had a strong enough connection between them, they could share thoughts, but that did not surprise her as much as their appearance. The sea beings looked semi-human, but had great shimmering pale skin like a dolphin and long silver hair. The one thing that stood out the most was their eyes. Each had large crystal blue eyes, much bigger than any eyes she had ever seen. This fascinated Trillium. She had only seen 4 sets of eyes since she left Phaedia. Her own, her mother's, Duran, and the 2 coin eyes of the phantom boatman. None were as bright as the sea dwellers. Each had small gills on both sides of their neck. They swam gracefully. When they were out of sight, she came out from the rock. "I have no experience and no maps to find the forbidden part of the sea," she thought, and began to feel very frustrated. "Maybe I can help," a small boy suggested. A young sea-dweller boy with light blue eyes looked up at her. He had come when she was distracted. "Who are you?" She tried to center her thoughts to him, but made no sense at all. "Think to me," the boy informed, trying to help out as much as he could. "Who are you?" she asked again, concentrating hard. She saw his face wrinkle in confusion. "You're not doing it right. Try to center your thoughts and then send a beam to me, like a white beam." She tried it and asked for a 3rd time. "Who are you?" "That's it," he said. "I'm Zede, son of King William. I am Prince of the Adrella Sea." She tried to send the beam out again. "How old are you?" she asked. "I'm 5 summers. Who are you? I've never seen you before." "My name is Trillium. I'm new here," she said nervously. This was the king's son, after all. I guessed that when I taught you how to talk, but it doesn't make sense to me. How could you just appear here? Your clothes are torn. Were you attacked? Yes and no. I'm an elf from land. No, you're an Adrella like me. What? Trillium was really confused now. I am not. I'm an elf. Just look at yourself, Seed answered. Trillium examined herself. Her clothes were ripped, but she looked different. Her skin was thick, smooth, and gray. All of her wounds were completely healed, and her hair had changed from auburn to silver, and her eyes from green to blue. You do have big ears, though. She began to panic, her life becoming more of a mystery than ever. She realized that her pack had disappeared. Along with the new arrows, her medicine, and everything else. With this last realization, she became frustrated. If you're a half-breed, you better come with me. So Trillium followed the boy slowly into the Coral Kingdom. She could see 3 coral towers. The entrance to Coral Kingdom was getting closer and closer. She was not sure that going to the king was such a good idea, for she was still in shock about her transformation. As she swam, she watched the other Adrella swim about. They entered the coral towers and went into the kingdom. Zeed took her through large round corridors and into a very large opening. The coral around her began to form a cave. The top was open, letting the light come through. There were 2 guards above, for the sea was no longer safe from dark spirits. Trillium was learning how to use her finned feet. The Adrella did not have a connected tail like mermaids of old tales did. Theirs split down the center. They had legs and knees, but flipper feet. She's with me. She must see my father. Stay here and I'll get you some clothes. Zeed left and Trillium remained quiet. They asked no questions. Zeed came back and slipped an Adrella dress over her head. It was made of a lightweight and strange material. She took off her rags and slid them off underneath the dress. Zeed took them and held on to them. They swam together into the center of the room, where there was a large coral chair, chiseled into a mighty throne fit for a king. 2 guards stood on each side. Upon the throne sat an older male, and obviously the biggest in the sea. His hair was very long and flowed behind him like a long silver scarf. Zeed swam up to him and pressed his forehead to his. Trillium watched with interest. She knew nothing of tradition here, but scouted her mind, trying to remember what Duran had said about greeting kings. She came to the foot of the throne, bowing her head before him. The king turned to his son. Who is this strange girl? This is Trillium. I just met her. She claims she is from land. She thinks she's an elf. Considering she didn't know how to talk to me, her strange ears, and these land clothes she was wearing, I kind of believe her, Zeed informed and held her ripped-up clothes out to him. You are the child of harmony, the firstborn of 2 races. The king's face darkened, and he spoke to her mind with urgency. He motioned towards the guards, who promptly left the huge throne room. You must be careful to whom you tell this to. Although you are expected among the citizens of Havenbell, there are others that may harm you with this knowledge. Your life is in danger. From the wizards? She asked. You've seen them? No, but I've seen the crows. I killed them all. Are they somehow connected to the wizards? She was relieved to finally have someone answer her questions. They are the wizards' eyes, scouts. They see for them. The wizards are after me, Trillium confirmed. There are 2 kinds of wizards, the dark ones and the wizards of the council. Many summers ago, Havenbell was still connected into one land. All types of life flourished there. The land was a place of harmony. Humans used to roam the land with fairies, unicorns, and great winged horses. Animals of all kinds lived about the green landscape and golden meadows. Everybody lived in peace. From the gifts nature provided, medicine was found by the fairies and humans. Trillium swam closer to him, her eyes locked on him, giving him her full attention. She didn't want to miss a word. This tale fascinated her. He continued. The members of the council each had a special gift. The council's spells brought about much goodness. The magic was known as the White Fire. The legend says that 2 of the good wizards became greedy with their power and retreated to the mountains to start a new council for themselves. The temple was relocated to protect it against the dark ones. The new wizards reproduced, making a larger group of misfits. They began to lure innocent people into their lair. Their magic is known as the Dark Fire. They stayed hidden in the mountains for some time and then became more jealous of the temple's power because they themselves used fairies for their own magic. They cast a powerful spell that split the ground apart and separated the life onto different islands. The winged horses were killed off, all but one. The fairies survived, but the humans transformed into elves, Adrella, and feathers, which is what we call the winged people. They live in the clouds. They are also known as Josepharians. I've seen one in my dreams. The split was many summers ago, and our council is trying to find a spell to unite all of us once again. None of us can stay out of our element for long or we all die. The dark wizards want us to stay separated. Their spell also made any crossbreeding impossible. You are the first, but I warn you, you are in very serious danger. Trillium began to understand her dilemma in its wholeness. She felt bitter towards Dron for never telling her about Havenbell's history or the wizards. He never told her or warned her that she was the first half-breed. William looked down at the girl and felt relief. He was overjoyed to see that she had made it this far without much knowledge. The creatures of Havenbell had been waiting for her for a very long time, and he himself had been waiting even longer. "What about the shell?" the girl asked. "How will I know what it looks like? I've never seen one before." King William swam off his throne and took Trillium to the sandy floor where he drew the shape of the shell. The shell of hope is lost in the forbidden sea. No one ventures there. Sharks of great size live there, and they love the way Adrella tastes. The king felt grief about this mission. He secretly wanted her to stay with him. He stared at the amulet which floated around her neck. His heart felt light. It had been many summers since he'd seen the green amulet. It brought memories back and confirmed her importance. "I must go, even if these sharks you talk about are killers. What do they look like?" she inquired. "They are monstrous gray beasts. One large fin sits upon the top of their bodies, and their jaws are laden with teeth that rip and stab. It will be very dangerous." The king wanted her to change her mind, but knew she would follow her destiny. "I am ready to challenge the odds. I must save us. What makes this shell so important?" "Spells were put into objects by the council to protect us. The crows took the shell of hope from the fairies, leaving them vulnerable to the wizard's fire. The shield was meant to keep out beings, not birds. If it is not returned, the wizards will destroy the fairies and corrupt the magic of the council once and for all." He watched for her response. "I lost my medicine when I fell into the sea. I have to be extra cautious." This worried William, but he had faith in her to succeed. "Havenbell's fate lies in my hands. I was raised to fight these wizards, and that is what I must do. Here, I have a potion from the fairies that you must drink now. It will help you. You are very brave, Trillium, and all of us shall benefit from your generosity." He gave her the fluorescent blue potion, and she opened it and drank it. "Thank you." She knelt again for the king. He roared with laughter, and Zeed followed with his giggles. Trillium wrinkled her brow, a little hurt. "Come to me," William replied. She did, and he pressed his forehead to hers. She felt at peace in the stranger's arms. Maybe it was because of his information, or because her mother was the last person to be near her. Either way, she liked King William and his son Zeed. It was a nice improvement from the boatman's skeleton rower with a bad attitude, and he didn't even talk. She was comforted by his touch, making Trillium more calm and confident about her new journey ahead. "I don't want you to go out there, but I know you must," the king said with despair. "Thank you, you've been very kind to me." She gave him a swift kiss on the cheek, and a big grin stretched across his face. "I must be going, Zeed. Thank you for your help." Zeed looked at her, winked an eye, and smiled. "Just remember," William's voice echoed, "never let anyone that you do not trust ever find out who you really are. It would make your journey very difficult." "I promise," she reassured him. "Follow the deep waters northeast." He pointed a webbed finger to guide her. "You'll find a stone trail. Look for the small shipwreck on the ocean floor, and you will be in the forbidden sea. The water temperature will drop to almost freezing. I recommend you be urgent while searching the waters." "I will miss you," Trillium thought softly to the king. "We will miss you as well. Make sure to visit us when your tasks are no longer heavy." She turned her head one last time at them. King William's eyes were large and round. She felt the cold current in the water and began to follow it northeast. Her skin, soft, thick, and smooth, made her body cut right through the water. Swimming was fun to her, and she intended to get her fill of it. She dove, twirled, and spun through the water, when no one else was around, of course. Outside of the Coral Kingdom, there were a lot more Adrella about. Trillium admired the uniqueness of the Adrella's features. Few Adrella turned their heads towards her, but nobody took notice of the stranger. When it was clear again, she swam slower, enjoying her new body. Her belly ached for food. It had been a long time since the last bite she had taken. The Adrella Sea was calm and peaceful underneath. The Adrella lived in coral domes all over the ocean floor. It provided a nice place to rest where they were safe from the predators of the ocean. Trillium passed quite a few Adrella holes, but ran into no one. The sea was full of life, and many colorful fish swam together in schools. They began to look appetizing and delicious. Trillium reached her arms out to shovel the fish into her mouth. They would come close, then at the last minute swim away. She began to get discouraged and began to swat at them with her hands, trying to grab one. There was a stinging at her fingertips, and when she raised her hands to her face, she noticed the webbing between her fingers. Her fingernails began to grow longer and longer, until she was adorned with 2 sharp pairs of claws. Trillium was surprised by yet another transformation. It didn't really matter much to her now. She began ravaging the fish by hurting them and then sticking them with her claws. Her animal instincts took over, and she began feeding wildly. The first fish tasted divine, and each bite she took seemed to taste even better. After a few fish, she was full and happy. She swam merrily towards the forbidden sea, searching for the stone path at the bottom. Huge patches of seaweed grew tall from the ocean floor. The seaweed reached towards the surface, blowing back and forth with a gentle current. Trillium swam 5 feet above the ocean's floor, scouring the bottom for the stone path. The sun sent rays through the water that flickered and glittered. Kelp stretched from the bottom of the ocean to the top, making an underwater jungle. A huge fish came into view. It had gray skin and a long lashing tail, itty-bitty black eyes, and a large fin on the top. Trillium panicked and hid behind some coral. The shark saw her movement and followed her with curiosity. It stuck its nose into the space in the coral where she hid. Trillium looked up, her eyes wide and heart pumping wildly. The monster opened its mouth to reveal 4 rows of long, razor-sharp teeth. Trillium swam out to the coral and followed the cold current at full speed. Her silver hair flowed behind her like ribbons. The shark tagged along behind her. Trillium swam as fast as she could. She noticed the stone trail at the bottom of the sea. She followed it, looking behind her at the shark. She felt a nibble at her fin foot and pulled away before the shark could bite down. Suddenly, the sunken ship came into view. A long mast stuck out sideways from the front that was buried in the sand. Coral and barnacles grew all over the surface. Trillium swam to it with the shark following her like a shadow. The shark opened its gigantic mouth full of vicious teeth, and at the last minute she squeezed into a small opening on the rusted ship. The shark examined the ship, sticking its nose into every opening, trying to sniff her out. She remained still, and after a while the shark gave up and went to search for another snack. She wanted to find the shell right away. Sharks looked too dangerous for her. She swam out of the decaying ship's opening and peered outside. When she saw no shark, she ripped away from the sunken ship and back into the path again. The cold current became almost icy. She knew she was getting closer. It appeared like land was close by, but she felt very creepy about approaching the shallow waters. The temperature grew so cold that she could almost feel her blood freezing. After an hour of searching while moving northeast, her amulet began to glow a very deep green. Getting closer to the sandy floor, she searched hard but could see nothing but sand. The amulet continued to glow. Trillium stuck her webbed fingers in the sand and began to scout for the shell. She used her claws like rakes. Nothing. If I don't find it, many people may die. I can't. There was a lump in the sand. She rejoiced. The shark appeared out of the dark water. From the look of it, he had not found dinner yet. Trillium clutched the shell as tight as she could and swam away, but the shark remained close behind her, all the time moving farther away from the safety of the king. She swam blind into the most dangerous part of the ocean. The shark's massive body closed in on her, nibbled on her fin, and bit down hard. She let out a cry. She turned around and saw a glimpse of her chewed-up fin. The blood from the wound spread through the water like red scarves. This made the shark mad with hunger. Trillium swam on, but the shark stayed close behind her. Her heart pounded and her body ached. The shark played with her like a cat would play with a live mouse. It rammed her hard from behind. The numbing impact slowed her down enough for the shark to take another bite out of her fin. She reeled again and pushed herself to swim faster. She imagined being eaten and digested by the shark. It only made her more desperate to escape. The shark closed in on her again, and she could see the sand rising. She was close to land and close to unconsciousness. She swam close to the surface. The shark swayed its large gray body behind her. Trillium turned and struck the beast with her long claws, tearing 10 large scratches into its thick flesh. The shark opened its huge mouth laden with teeth in a rage and shot forward, ramming Trillium again and almost knocking her completely out. When her senses came back, she swam to shore like lightning. The shark didn't bother to follow her into the shallow. Trillium gasped as she surfaced. Her gills started to close and her lungs opened again. It hurt. That was all she knew when she pulled herself out on the bank. She could hear the pounding and rushing sound of what sounded like water flowing. Her body was battered and bleeding. Her mind was a mess of confusion and relief. She passed out cold on the not-so-comfortable points of the rocks and began to transform again. Phariseth flew away from Josephera, his father's kingdom in the sky. He replayed the last words his father had spoken in his mind like a bad dream. His father was very strong and noble, never showing defeat, sorrow, or vulnerability. Today was different. His father's main concern lately was to build a new council. Wizards were tracking the current one, and they were more secluded now than ever. What bothered him the most was the tone in which his father spoke today. He sounded weak and scared. Phariseth didn't like this one bit. When his father sounded scared, he knew there was something wrong, and it terrified Phariseth to the bone. Our temple and our council will be doomed if the wizards find us, and I sense they are very close. The half-breed girl must come soon, if she exists and is still alive, his father said sternly, but with lightness in his eyes that Phariseth knew as love. There was something else in his eyes, something that worried him, a look of doubt. The Dark Ones could attack any day now. King Jonathan looked at his son and then turned his eyes to the floor. Time is short. The doubt he saw in his father's eyes troubled him. It seemed to dig at his brain. He flew through the clouds, his large white wings gliding through the air like a large eagle. He began to see the small island from above and its mighty waterfall. As he got closer, he could see something, someone, laying on the rocky beach. No one knows this place, Phariseth thought to himself, making him feel timid about landing and encountering the stranger. As he got closer, he could see the being more clearly. He could see blood on the rocks. He prepared to land, flapped his wings, and landed with grace. He approached the being cautiously, finding out it wasn't a man, but a woman. There was a necklace around her neck that glimmered in the sun. It was a royal amulet. She was lying on her back. There was a big purplish black bruise the size of a plate wrapped around her upper thigh. She had cuts on her face and one above her eyebrow. Phariseth's heart sank. He was looking down on the most beautiful and most beat-up girl he had ever seen. He had observed her long curly auburn hair, still wet from the sea. He stared at the large bruise on her thigh, and his eyes followed her legs down to her feet. Phariseth let out a gasp. On her left foot there was a large chunk of flesh gone just below her smallest toe. The rocks below her feet were deep red. The blood moved down the rocks like a small stream. She had a very shiny object next to her. He thought it looked like a shell from the sea, but not right somehow. He picked it up. His whole body was numbed. The object pushed a rush of power through him. His hands clasped tighter around it. He stood there for a couple minutes. His head felt light. He then walked into a small path that led behind the waterfall. There were holes inside of the rocks, where he now tried to hide the shell. He almost had to pry it off of his hands. He finally let it go, which was not easy at all, and then returned to the beaten stranger. Poor girl, what could have happened to her? Phariseth wondered. He looked at her hair and saw her 2 long pointed ears that he had not seen before. She's an elf. How did an elf get on this unknown island? He remembered that her hair was wet. That's impossible, he said immediately, rejecting the idea. There's no land anywhere close around here. There's no way an elf can swim that far and not drown. He saw the necklace again, and the strange thought hit him like a brick. He began to lean to touch the amulet, then hesitated. What if she wakes up? She might think I was stealing her gem. He stood up again. This bothered him at first, but he let it go for the time being. I can't just leave her like this. He wore a light, loose fabric, a warm cream color. His loose pants had legs that spread out near the feet, looking almost like a skirt. On top, he wore a toga-like shirt that was also light in weight, that hung to his mid-thigh. It fastened over his left shoulder, and a golden emblem in the shape of a circle was sewn into the fabric. There was a design of a J inside of the small golden plate. His right shoulder was bare. He lifted the top over his head and draped it in his left arm. He approached the battered elven girl, leaned down and slowly lifted her. He had one arm under her back and one under her knees. He went on the right side of the waterfall to the small flat clearing. There were 2 fir trees poking up nobly from the soil. The ground was flat. A little grass grew in small patches, and dead leaves and pine needles scattered across the ground. Great, Verisov said. It has to be better than the sharp rocks. He laid her down slow and soft, keeping her torso raised. He slid behind her on his knees and began to slip the cream-colored toga shirt over her head. It wasn't as hard to dress her as he thought it would be. The toga hung past her knees and looked like a dress that a winged woman would wear inside of the kingdom. He took off the wet clothes that she was wearing. He was hoping it would warm her up. Who is she? He thought aimlessly. He hoped from the bottom of his heart that she would be all right. Then a thought returned to him like a dream that's memory has been jogged and remembered. The necklace. His father wore one similar to it, except his stone was clear. I see it every day. How could I have forgotten? Then it was clear to him. His father's voice filled his head. The half-breed girl must come soon if she exists and is still alive. Time is short. It's her, it's the half-breed, he thought to himself. She's beautiful. His father had pressured Verisov to find a wife. He looked at all the women inside Josephera Kingdom, but none seemed to strike a chord within his heart. It was the child of harmony who made his heart leap. Boy, my father would kill me if I brought her home to marry. The thought of them coming together was far from reality, but Verisov let it live in his mind just the same. He was a dreamer, and his head seemed to be floating in the clouds most of the time. Verisov stared at her with amazed eyes. He couldn't figure out what to do next. Should he tell his father? He looked at her again and felt sorrow for her. She was pale and her lips were almost absent of all color. He leaned and put the back of his hand lightly on her cheek. She was cold as ice. Verisov felt helpless and wished he knew what to do. He looked at her wounded foot. He now realized that it looked like a bite from something with very dangerous teeth. He looked up at her pale face and lips and put his head next to hers in sorrow. In northern Havenbell, there stood 3 large mountains that were known as the Mountains of Shadow, also called the Fire Mountains. They sheltered the home of the Dark Ones. There was a large cave in between the 2nd and 3rd mountain that had served as their hideout for many winters. Screams and chants echoed through the caverns. Inside, the Dark Ones danced about drunkenly, singing their victory songs. 6 of them danced around the fire pit, stumbling every few steps. They held mugs of potion, the kind to get you pissed drunk. The mugs waved sloppily side to side, the brews splashing and spilling over onto the floor. They sang together in unison. The women wizards looked and sounded more like hags or banshees, their high-pitched squeals standing out from the rest. They sang very out of tune, so bad in fact that any creature would go insane listening to them. They all burst out with laughter. The women's cackles mixed with the men's bellows. The 2 eldest wizards, Jade and Tolan, sat together, still laughing, with horrible sounds that echoed through the cave. Mutt! Jade, the oldest and most wicked female, shouted. Mutt, the youngest and smallest of them, hobbled over. He was their servant, scapegoat, and victim of constant beatings. Fetch me more brew or I'll break your arms, Jade demanded. Mutt did a 180-degree spin and fell under his clumsy feet. This made the wizards laugh with delight. De Groot, about 20 winters old, spat on Mutt, which increased the insane laughter inside of the cave. The eldest wizards were the first generation of the Dark Ones, and also the leaders of this motley crew. There were 8 of them total, not including Mutt. Tolan, when standing, reached about 6.5 feet, his face laden with wrinkles, the most adorning his forehead. He looked like he was around 55 winters, but he was really 132. His nose was skinny and long, and his eyes so dark that they looked black. Mutt slowly got to his feet and scuffled into a room where the food and drink were stored. He held Jade's mug and filled it from the brew barrel. He only filled it 3/4 of the way to the top, knowing that if he spilled it, he would be beaten. Mutt took a brief glance over his shoulder to assure no one could see him. Then he hawked up a ball of phlegm and spit it into Jade's mug. He, too, had tricks of his own. "Drink this," he muttered, and went back to the fire with the others. Jade sat next to Tolan. Their 2 daughters, Aurora and Nemi, sat on their right. De Groot, Nemi's lover, walked around the fire. "That damn kid has never been able to sit down," Jade thought spitefully. She remembered his father and mother. They had called his father the Cloak, because he was the master of disguise and the master of lies. De Groot inherited his father's gifts, all except for one. Jade never liked his parents much, and didn't think he had been much of an improvement. De Groot rambled and stumbled around the fire, shouting about the crows. Ever since the half-breed girl killed 6 of his crows, De Groot couldn't stop complaining about it. "I can trick her and wring her little neck until her eyes pop out," he shouted. Jade saw Mutt hobbling in from the grub room with her fresh cup of wizard's brew. It was made from all of them except Mutt, of course, because the idiot had no power. Each put a spice of their own into the brew, but what made it great were the fairies. The power that they contained worked triple-fold when the fairies were dead. Their goodness turned bad was of high potency and is the power source for the dark fire. If you drank too much, you could kill yourself. De Groot was master of the brew as he was with the skies, and he never died of it like Jade had wished on many occasions. Mutt kept his face on the cave's dirty floor as he approached her. Looking at them sometimes earned him a smack or two. Mutt's heartbeat quickened with sick delight as he handed the mug to Jade. Already too drunk to notice something was floating in her drink, she held it up to her lips with not a glance at it and took 3 big sloppy gulps. The brew dribbled down the corners of her mouth and underneath her chin. "That's what you get," Mutt thought to himself. "You mess with me, I'll mess with you." He was an elf before he began to feel the black need and ran away to join them. He was an outcast, even with the elves, and he could no longer be the center of jokes and victim of laughs and sneers. He began to have dreams about the dark place, the cave, and the fire. One day he met a feather by the name of Tambit, who had fled Josephera Kingdom. He had had the same dark dreams that tormented Jack. That had been Mutt's real name before the elves made Mutt his official nickname. Tambit had felt the same hatred for his race as well. They left together to find the dark cave. Tambit flew and carried Mutt most of the way. Usually this would kill them both, being they were both restricted to their element, but they were an exception because something was protecting them. The dark wizards had given them power. 5 winters later, things had only gotten worse. All of the wizards hated him, especially Jade and De Groot. They forced Mutt to drink the brew, but gave him no power. He was slimmer before he came to the wizards, but when he drank the brew, he got ugly, just like them. He had no way to escape. He would die defenseless. Tambit had a crush on Jade and Tolan's oldest daughter, Aurora, and also became very different, very evil, in fact. His white wings began to grow black feathers and had later peeled off like a butterfly's cocoon, feathers and all. Underneath he grew different wings, onyx in color and smooth as a snake's skin. Sharp horns adorned the points of his black wings. They gave Mutt the chills. Aurora was the best looking out of all of them, except for Lar. They were the only 2 gifted enough not to develop the spots that all the rest of them had. Mutt stared blindly at Jade's face without being aware of it. He looked at her black snake-like hair and her bluish-black rings under her eyes. Her eyes themselves were sometimes black as the night sky, with an eerie emptiness like no soul possessed them. A blinding force struck the side of Mutt's head, feeling like a boulder had struck his cheek. His eyes went red and his vision returned slowly. "Sorry," Mutt trembled. He realized he had been looking at her. His eyes locked on the floor of the cave. He was scared. All of the others laughed. He ran as fast as his sore legs could muster into a different passage. It was a separate cavern room that he hid when he was attacked by her. He could hear her running behind him. "I'm gonna get you, Mutt!" Duran flew fast. He was nervous about Trillium. He hadn't seen her for a while and was not sure if she had surfaced above the Forbidden Sea. She was looking for the shell. He found her pack, quiver, and bow on the empty boat he found adrift. He held them tight in his claws and flapped frantically with his wings. He began to see the small island from above, and as he got closer he could see a shape behind the trees. He could see wings, and happiness filled his head. Duran was beyond thirsty and hoped she was all right. The sight of the waterfall cheered him up a little. Farisef could see Duran coming and squinted his eyes to make out the objects that dangled from his claws. Farisef stood up, approached the shore, and waved his arms at the approaching owl. "Duran!" he yelled. "Hurry, there's trouble!" Duran landed without grace. He dropped the pack and quiver, spraying the arrows across the rocks. He tumbled over a couple times and then stood dizzy for a moment. "You okay?" Farisef asked, concerned, and patted the owl's white-feathered head. "That was rough," he twittered. His yellow eyes rolled like a cartoon. "I should have landed in the tree." "You'll be just fine," Farisef confirmed, happy that his owl friend had not joined the girl's state of unconsciousness. He held his arm out to Duran, who swiftly hopped up. He was careful with his claws, making sure not to hurt Farisef. The prince stood up with Duran perched on his arm. He looked almost like a statue. His face was a stone frown. "It's her, Duran." Farisef went to where Trillium lay sprawled on the grass underneath a tree. Duran was shocked. It was Trillium, but she was asleep and almost looked dead. There were cuts and small bruises on her face and arms. Then he saw the bloody cloth wrapped around her foot. "What happened to her?" the owl chattered. "The gray beast in the sea attacked her. Why was she in the Forbidden, Duran? Everyone knows the sharks will kill you if you fall into this part of the ocean." "The wizards haven't found her yet. That's a miracle," Duran thought. He looked back at Trillium, who lay on her back. Her face was void of all color and her lips were gray. "She looks dead," Duran stuttered with fright. Farisef knelt down to her and put his hand next to her nose and mouth. "She's still alive, but she's getting worse. Time is short." He was unaware that he had spoken his father's same words and with the same frail voice. Duran flew up and soared to the shore, where he dropped the quiver, bow, and the self-made pack. He picked one of them up and came back to Farisef and dropped it into his lap. It was her pack. "Inside," Duran said, and perched himself on the branch above Trillium. Farisef opened the pack and retrieved the strange bottle with glowing pink liquid inside. "I know that word, and I am happy to see it," Farisef rejoiced, and uncorked the medicine. He lifted her up, letting her back lean against his chest. He opened her mouth and slowly let the pink liquid drip inside. The minute it touched her tongue, the color in her face returned. Her lips turned a healthy pink again. He slowly gave her half of the bottle and then recorked it. Duran and Farisef looked at each other and then back at Trillium. Nothing. Farisef laid her back down. "You never answered my question, Duran. Why was she in the sea? Did she have anything with her?" the owl asked. Oh yes, he knew that strange object all right. He went to where he had stashed the glittery disc. When he touched it, he felt the warm, intoxicating feeling again, and when he brought it over to Duran, he didn't want to let it go. He made himself drop it, and when he did, the feeling was instantly gone. "Be careful with that," Duran warned. "It belongs to the fairies. You can't handle it." "What is it?" "The shell of hope," Duran answered. Farisef stood breathless. He had heard of the shell from his father. The shell glittered in the sun, tempting Farisef to touch it again, but he would not. Trillium's eyelids began moving, and Farisef jumped over to her. They opened and closed again. She slowly opened her eyes again and kept them open for a minute, staring up at Farisef. She seemed to see him but looked through him at the same time. Then her eyelids closed again over the most startling green eyes he had ever seen before. Farisef sighed. "I really thought she was going to wake up this time," he said, and then panic struck him like lightning. "My father's going to kill me! I'm late for lecture! Crap! Duran, can you stay here with her?" Farisef begged. Duran nodded his head. "I have to tell my father. He's been waiting for her." Then Duran surprised him with his consent. "King Jonathan must know. Now go!" Duran urged him. "Duran, what is her name?" "Trillium," he answered. "Like the flower?" "Yes." Farisef started to leave, walking towards the rocky shore, and then stopped short in his tracks. He turned towards Duran and Trillium. "You know my father?" Farisef asked, bewildered. "I know all of the council," Duran cooed back. This struck Farisef as very peculiar, but he had no time left to wonder. He turned towards the shore and stretched his massive wings. He flew away towards Josephera, knowing that his owl friend would protect her. It was a sworn duty. Inside the secret cave of the Dark Wizards, Mutt sat in a dirty corner of his hiding place. He was relieved. Jade had been merciful. He really thought he was in for it this time, but all she did was smack his head a couple times. It stung and throbbed when she hit him, but he knew it could have been worse. She could have thrown things, rocks and knives, and not even touched them. She moved them with her mind. He heard the wizards talk about the girl and the council often. He felt bad for her because she was an elf, like he used to be before he drank the wizard's brew, and because the council had no idea how ruthless their enemies were. Tambit paced back and forth by the fire pit, with his arms clasped behind his back. Jade, Tolan, and Aurora sat on their rocky thrones discussing plans to destroy the temple. Degroot and Nemi were alone somewhere. Tambit spoke. "We know that the temple opens at full moons and half moons. The cloak was the only one who could completely disappear, and without him, we have no way to get back into the temple, let alone find the new one." His deep voice echoed through the cave. "The cloak was a great loss to us. He had wonderful tricks. He was clever enough to steal the temple's eye, but not clever enough to keep it under his cloak," Tolan announced, disappointed. Jade remembered the way both of Degroot's parents had died 17 winters ago. They had gone to steal the eye of the temple from the council, waited for the council to leave, and had pried it out of place. He managed to escape before the temple faded and trapped him in forever. Unfortunately, he took the ball out from the shelter of his cloak, and when the sunlight had hit it, it had fried them both into cinders and black dust. Jade remembered coming to the spot that night to retrieve the ball and seeing the dust and ash carcasses. She had kicked and spread the cinders into the grass until it was unnoticeable. She remembered laughing, enjoying the wretched trick she had pulled. Degroot has power to camouflage himself. We could send him into the temple with someone else, maybe even a council member, Aurora added with her smooth, hypnotic voice. "Good idea, but the council would know if there was a member killed. They're all connected, remember?" Tolan returned. "Yes, I suppose you're right, Father, but there has to be another way into the temple." "I think I know a way," Jade said slyly, "but all of us are going to have to take part." They continued to scheme and plot their revenge. From this hiding spot, Mutt listened intently. Trillium's mind floated out of her body, surrounded in a black cotton world. She saw the angel again with the golden green eyes and long blonde flowing hair. He was knelt over her, looking right into her eyes. She could see trees and guessed she was dreaming again. The sun shone from behind the angel's hair, making a halo of light around his head. She blacked out again. 10 minutes after Farisef returned to Josephera, Trillium woke up. She could feel the tender muscles in her body as she sat up. Duran watched hopefully. When she heard the waterfall's rushing sounds, her memory returned. "Duran!" she shouted and smiled. "I'm so glad to see you." "Not as happy as I am to see you," he returned. Trillium told Duran about her meeting with King William and about the shark that had attacked her. She also told him about the woman she saw when she had a dream about the castle. I also keep dreaming of this man. I don't even know who he is and if he exists. Trillium released. He saved you, Duran chirped and hopped to Trillium and rubbed her neck. He saved you, Duran chirped and hopped to Trillium. He saved you, Duran chirped, hopped to Trillium and nuzzled her neck. I saw him, Duran, just before I woke up. Was he really here? You looked right at him before you blacked out again. Who is he? What's his name? He is Prince Phariseph of Josephera. What? Josephera Kingdom is in the clouds where the winged people live. We call them feathers. His father is the king, and that castle you had a dream about is their palace. Duran helped. She didn't realize until that moment that her dreams were very powerful. She was seeing the future along with the past, and wondered when she would meet the girl with the colorfully designed clothes. Prince Phariseph, Trillium spoke, liking the way it rolled off of her tongue. Where did he go? I want to meet him. He went back to the castle to inform King Jonathan that you are here. Why? I don't know the king. No, but he knows you. How? You'll find out soon enough, Duran replied, and with that she knew she could pry no longer into that subject. Trillium tried to stand up. She needed to relieve herself and get a drink of water. It was tough, but she managed to stand. She hopped to the waterfall, not able to put any pressure on her injured foot, and got a drink. She noticed the bandage on her wound and the light flowing top that she now wore. Duran saw her, noticed this, and answered before she asked. Phariseph's. This made her smile. She could smell him on the shirt, his own male scent. She liked it. My pack. I lost my pack and my arrows. No, I found them. Duran went to the shore and collected the scattered arrows. Then he brought it to her. Pack? She saw it close to where she was lying down before and went over to get it. She saw the shell as well and grinned. I still have it. It's a miracle. She hopped behind the bushes for a moment and then returned to Duran. The owl noticed that her bruises were fading, along with the cuts on her face. She was getting better at walking, her hop now becoming a hobble. She let Duran up on her forearm, and she scratched his head and neck. He closed his eyes and lifted one claw in pleasure. Trillium giggled. I love you, Duran. I love you too, Trillium. Up above, Phariseph scuffled along the palace floor, with a cream-colored Josepherian dress draped over one arm. He had picked it out for Trillium and guessed it would be her size. He himself had changed into full and proper clothing. Another toga-like shirt, like the one he had dressed her in, hung loosely over his broad shoulders. This one was white. He wore a golden shiny belt that tied in the back and white loose pants. His father had been happy to hear of Trillium's arrival, but was worried about her condition. Jonathan knew that the medicine that they made at the temple would work, but still wanted her to come to the palace and rest. Jonathan talked about the council to Phariseph almost daily, but had never let him go into the temple or meet the council members. Jonathan realized that all of this would be changing now that Trillium had arrived. He never revealed any secrets of the council to his son. Phariseph knew of the Child of Harmony, but did not know about Maylene. Things were changing. Phariseph would be advancing to the next level of his training. Jonathan watched his son scuttle through the palace corridors. He went in one room and came back out with a pair of woman's sandals. Phariseph turned and waved to him. Jonathan lifted a hand in return. Phariseph left eager to return to the mystical girl. By the time Phariseph returned to the island that he named Misty Falls, Trillium had reduced her hobble to a straight limp. Phariseph saw her standing up and felt his belly flutter. His mouth began to dry up. Trillium saw the angel of her dreams flying closer. He landed smoothly and folded his wings. Trillium limped towards him. Hello, Phariseph. He noticed that the bruises and cuts on her face were gone. What's wrong? She asked him with concern. Nothing. I'm just glad to see how much better you've gotten, he replied. I feel fine, but I am pretty tired. The sun will go down in a few hours, and my father wanted you to come to the palace and rest. He looked down at the bloody, tattered scrap of his shirt that was tied around Trillium's foot. How does it feel? It kind of throbs. Trillium noticed Farisev's loose flowing clothes. The sun glimmered off of his golden belt. His hair was braided and hung long down his back. He smiled, and she examined his lips. "What's that?" she asked concerning the bundle of fabric he was holding under his arm. He unwrapped it. The sandals and a blue potion were inside. "For you." He gave her the dress that matched what he now wore. "The potion is a long endurance spell. This way you can stay in Josephera and not get sick from being up high." "I can't believe I'm really going to see the castle. I saw it in a dream before. It was amazing." "It would be my pleasure to escort the most beautiful woman in HAVENBELL around my father's kingdom." Trillium blushed, and Farisev saw this. He smiled. She liked this new feeling Farisev gave her. "I still can't believe you are a prince. I am only an orphan elf who is just learning about HAVENBELL." Farisev put both of his arms on her shoulders and looked warmly into her eyes. The gaze seemed to freeze in time and seemed to last hours instead of minutes. "You are more than an orphan. You talk as though you were an outcast." He leaned closer until his face was almost touching hers. "You are the child of Harmony, the one and only." "I really didn't have a choice, did I?" "Don't be silly. You are more important to HAVENBELL than any king or queen. Only you have the power to transform, and only you can bring all of us together again. You should be very proud to be yourself." This made Trillium smile. She wished she could feel his face on hers. "Thanks, Farisev," she said, but her smile faded again. He took his hands off of her shoulders and gave her a questioning glance. "What is it?" "My mother. I can't stop thinking about her." She walked and sat down next to the rushing waterfall. Farisev joined her. "I know she's dead. The wizards killed her, but I miss her so much. She speaks to me in dreams. I can see every detail of her face. I'm sure she watches over you," Farisev added, trying to help out. "I've needed her every day of my life. I feel like we are still connected somehow." A depressed look still sat on her face. "A pretty girl like you shouldn't wear such a heavy frown." He wiped the tear from her cheek. Trillium smiled and felt her face getting hot. "That's better," Farisev said, so quiet that it was almost a whisper. Then he leaned closer and kissed her gently on the lips. "Ahem!" Duran interrupted from the tree branch above. They both jumped, startled and embarrassed. They had forgotten Duran had been watching and hearing everything from above. Trillium started to laugh, and Farisev soon joined in. He had a pleasant laugh that made her think of all the beautiful days she spent exploring Maylene. "Yes, Duran?" she asked with humor. "The fairies need the shell. You must go soon." He talked almost like a man of 50 summers, the voice no longer fitting his small white body. The words came out from his beak like a ventriloquist dummy. The voice had changed drastically. Trillium's first instinct was to ask about it, but she knew that now was not the time for questions. "Let's get ready then," she said, excited, and picked up the Josepherian dress and sandals, then disappeared behind the trees and bushes. Farisev watched her until he could no longer see her figure. He looked up at Duran. "You won't tell my father about the kiss, will you?" he asked Duran. "If he were to find out that I fancy the child of Harmony, I'm sure I would never hear the end of it." Farisev felt joy and pity at the same time. He was sort of depressed about the whole thing. Although Feathers fell in love with Adrella and elves quite often, it was a very difficult relationship, filled with the obstacles of elemental sickness, with no hope for children unless you were lucky enough to get the right spell. His father wanted him to marry a feather woman, and having an elf for a girlfriend would not be good gossip around the kingdom. Duran looked at Farisev. "I will not speak, but you are not to fall in love, so focus on the task at hand," Duran demanded. The prince frowned, knowing the owl was right. Trillium came out of the brush. Twigs cracked beneath her feet. Farisev's mouth dropped open in shock. The white dress fit her perfectly and fit nicely around her figure. Her left shoulder was bare, revealing her smooth tan skin. The dress strap hung over the right shoulder. The material was on the brink of sheerness. No girl had ever looked that attractive to him. Her hair bounced as she came towards him. The bandage on her left foot remained, but the sandal strap went through her big toe in second without interference. The pain of her wound had reduced to a dull throb. "You're beautiful," he sputtered numbly. Trillium blushed again. "It's a little awkward, but it is pretty." She shifted her weight back and forth on her feet, making her sandals glitter in the sun. "Are you ready, Trill? Do you think you can make it?" She hugged him tight and whispered in his ear, "I feel I can do anything as long as I am with you." They embraced each other again. Farisef felt that he was addicted to her touch and could get hungry for it very quickly. When she saw the look on his face, she knew why he was bothered and why he had that stony look upon his face. Trillium went to search for her belongings. She opened the bottle and drank half of the blue potion. It was almost tasteless, but it had a dull, sweet tinge to it. When she swallowed it, it warmed her belly like a small fire. Trillium raised her eyebrows like she had already forgotten what she tasted. That should be enough for now. Farisef gazed at the long shadows of the trees that stretched and looked ominous about the floor of the island. Sunset was near. He looked into the mysterious green of her eyes. "Sun's going down. Let's go. I want you to see the castle. Are you coming, Duran?" she invited. He clicked his tongue. Her hurt foot only let out a small pain. It was hardly noticeable now. The wind gusted, making the trees shake, and her light dress sway to and fro. She held her pack and quiver over her shoulder. Farisef picked her up in his arms, and they flew off together. As they rose higher, Trillium gazed back at the little island and watched it get smaller and smaller with intense joy that only children experience. She was grateful to Farisef for saving her life. She realized she could have been lying on the jagged rocks of Misty Falls, battered, bruised, and close to death without ever knowing what a kiss felt like. She tightened her grip around Farisef's neck and laid her head on his chest. He looked back with those golden green eyes and smiled.